Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari. Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari. Yashodanandana Praja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Praja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vannachari. Yamunatira Vannachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vannachari. Yamunatira Vannachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Acharya Ashtatar Shata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Acharya Ashtatar Shata Shri Srimad Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Mathura Dham Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulasi Devi Ki Jai. Yamunamaya Ki Jai. Gangamaya Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 4, Text 6. Tabyam nirdayamanan tan upalabhya krudvaha raja uvacha mahan somaha. Okay. Somo manyum prashamayan eva tabyam nirdayamanam stan upalabhya kurudvaha rajovacha mahan somo manyum prashamayan eva tabhyam nirdayamanam stan upalabhya kurudvaha rajovacha mahan somo manyum prashamayan iva tabyam nirdayamanam stan upalabhya kurudvaha rajovacha mahan somo manyum prashamayan iva. Yam nirdayamanam stan upalabhya karudvaha rajovacha mahan somo manyum prashamayan iva. Nirdayamanam stan upalabhya karudvaha rajovacha mahan somo shamayan iva. Tabyam nirdayamanam stan upalabhya karudvaha rajovacha mahan somo manyum prashamayan iva. Manam stam upalabhya karudvaha vachamahan somo manyum prashamayan iva. Namstan karudvaha somo tabyam by the wind and fire nirdayamanan being burned tan them the trees upalabhya seeing krudvaha O Maharaj Parikshit Raja the king of the forest uvacha said Mahan the great Somaha predominating deity of the moon Somadev Manyum the anger Prashamayan pacifying Eva like. Translation: My dear King Parikshit, when Soma, the king of the trees and the predominating deity of the moon, saw the fire and wind burning all the trees to ashes, he felt great sympathy because he is the maintainer of all herbs and trees. To appease the anger of the Prachetas, Soma spoke as follows. Purport. It is understood from this verse that the predominating deity of the moon is the maintainer of all the trees and plants throughout the universe. It is due to the moonshine that trees and plants grow very luxuriantly. Therefore, how can we accept the so-called scientists whose moon expeditions have informed us that there are no trees or vegetation on the moon? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Somo vrikshadishtata sa eva vrikshanam raja. Soma, the predominating deity of the moon, is the king of all vegetation. How can we believe that the maintainer of vegetation has no vegetation on his own planet? Om Agyana Timarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Prijna Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jigatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thank you all for giving me a chance to speak on the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm very honored and also in anxiety to speak in front of so many great devotees. So this is a very awesome purport we have here. It is understood from this verse that the predominating deity of the moon is the maintainer of all trees and plants throughout the universe. So Srila Prabhupada was explaining that the so-called scientists are saying that they went to the moon, but that all they saw was dust. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. They said that they went to the moon and they just saw dust and it looked like a desert. My Guru Maharaj often repeats this example of he went to some very big NASA type of place and they were showing the moon rocks. And on the description in the glass case, and the person who's giving the tour is explaining, and here are the rocks that they brought back from the moon. And surprisingly enough, they look just like the rocks in Arizona. And there's this example that Srila Prabhupada explains where someone wakes up in the middle of the night in their house and they hear like some glass shatter downstairs. And when they turn around, when they go to see what's going on, they hear someone downstairs yell, "I'm not stealing." So there's a principle here of why would somebody be saying this if there might be some truth to it. So yeah, and then also to spend billions of dollars to go someplace, or trillions of dollars, and then just for the purpose of getting a rock, it doesn't really make that much sense. And also, when I was at the Houston temple, my family wanted to visit. There's a large NASA museum there about the moon landing. So we went to this NASA museum, and I remember seeing this timeline where it showed like in 19 something or other, we spent this many billions of dollars to go into space. And then a few years later, we spent this many billions of dollars to go towards the moon. And this many billions of years later, we spent this many dollars to orbit around the moon. And then this year we spent this many billions of dollars. We went to the moon and we brought back rocks. And then it shows like there's like 4 more years. It says like this time we went and we like took a picture of some dust. This time we went and we took another photo. But then it just stops after that. So it's like 19 something or other. And then they never go back again. So I saw the rocks there. They didn't look very special. There wasn't any proof in the museum to like show that this definitely happened, because I'm behind a big glass case And then a few feet from that, there's a rock in another glass case. And you can't really distinguish it from any other type of rock. But there's this whole like $1 million facility built around it where you go and get tickets like Disney World to see it. So, and then yesterday we were also hearing how it's escapism to try and dive into all sorts of entertainment to forget the reality that's going on. So we see America's very good at the whole entertainment industry, and there's so many movies and things and built up around different types of propaganda. So there might be some war, make a big movie, and then say this country's the enemy or this guy's the enemy. Then a few years later, make a movie about how they killed him. And so similarly, we have a moon movie where we go to the moon and get the rocks. So I'm just making a few points that show that it might not really be the case that there's a moon landing. And then also I remember in following, or in the Srila Prabhupada Leela Amrita, the devotees were explaining how they saw the moon landing on the TV, and one devotee was very amazed, and Prabhupada said, no, we didn't go. And then a few months later, there was a newspaper that was talking about the moon landing, and on page like 27 or something later on in the newspaper, it said, now, because of this wonderful moon landing, taxes will go up this much to pay for it. And Prabhupada said, that's the reason. So America and many places in the world make all sorts of entertainment just for the purpose of pushing different political agendas. And it's a nice way to, I guess, get things done. But so we see here in the purport, therefore, how can we accept the so-called scientists whose moon expeditions have informed us that there are no trees or vegetation on the moon? So this is a nice principle also, is that we're accepting the version of the Vedas. So when something doesn't line up with the Vedas, then instead of throwing out the Vedic literature and all of the great authorities who are passing it on to us, it would be better to stick with. It's a question of what authority are we going to choose. We can choose Shukadev Goswami, who's giving so much information in the Srimad Bhagavatam about everything and also about cosmology, or we could choose some mundane scientist who doesn't have controlled senses, has all the defects of a conditioned living being, prone to make mistakes, prone to be illusioned, cheating propensity, and imperfect senses. So that's one point, is that a liberated living entity is not doesn't have these defects. So it would be much better to actually take our knowledge from someone like Shukadev Goswami or Srila Prabhupada, because a conditioned living being has imperfect senses. So when we go outside, we see the sun and it looks like a big disc, but that's because our senses are imperfect. If we actually learn from someone who's been to the sun or a presiding deity in the sun planet, we learn that it's actually a whole planet, and there's living beings, just like how there's living beings made of mostly earth and water on this planet. There's living beings there made of mostly fire. So with our imperfect senses, we can't learn very much. But the second the lights are out and somewhere, you trip over everything and run into stuff. So the senses are imperfect, and then also prone to make mistakes. Learning something from someone who's making mistakes isn't going to be so fruitful. And then also cheating propensity. So we have a conditioned living entity has the propensity to like teach something or show that, yes, I know this knowledge, even though when they don't fully understand the subject. So that's the cheating propensity. So any conditioned living entity in this material world is prone to these things. So to take such a person as an authority wouldn't be very fruitful. It would be better to learn from an authority who is perfect, like Krishna. So Krishna has all the knowledge in the world. He created everything. He's got a fully spiritual form. So there's nothing mundane about him. And so the Vedic literature is being passed down through disciplic succession, which means one person is passing it to the next without changing it. So if we take these persons as our authorities, then we're set. We can actually have real knowledge. Let's see. I heard this point before, how if someone goes to take piano lessons, but they've already learned some piano, then it's going to cost much more for that person than when the teacher is teaching just a new student. Does that make sense? Because the person who's learned some piano before, they have to unlearn. The teacher has to unteach them everything. So we might come from, like, I had gone to college, and so I was thinking there's these astronomy classes I took, and this textbook, and this and that, where it says that this is how the universe is working. So then someone has to do even more effort to help me get that knowledge out of the way before I can learn the actual truth of the matter. And we see actually in the Srimad Bhagavatam that most of what's given in our textbooks in school doesn't actually make much sense at all. Like, one of the things that we learn about is Darwin's theory. And Srila Prabhupada said that the more you kick out Darwin's theory, the more spiritually advanced you become. So I was hoping we could try to kick out Darwin's theory a little bit today, and in this way make more spiritual advancement. So Prabhupada gives a lot of reasons that these theories that scientists make are not so strong. And I mean, one of the main things is that these points being made in modern science are theories. So a theory means it's like a hypothesis or a guess. It could be like this, or it could be like that. So like with Darwin's theory, it's the idea is that life is originating from chemicals, and then the bodies are evolving into different bodies. So a monkey eventually evolves into a human being, and like this. But we know that if life is coming from chemicals, then once life leaves a human body, if we just supply the same those chemicals that life was starting from, they could just put those chemicals back in the body and the person would come back to life, but it doesn't happen. There was someone actually giving a lecture, some sort of science talk, and they were explaining how all of life comes from chemicals. And one of Prabhupada's disciples asked a question, and he said, if I supply you those chemicals, then can you make life? And the scientist who gave the whole talk said, that I cannot say. So they're making these theories and claims, but there's no actual proof to back them up. If there's a theory, you need to do an experiment and show that it works to prove it. But there's no life being made from chemicals. Not even a scientist can't even make a little ant in a science lab or a piece of grass. It doesn't happen. What else does the Darwin's theory say? Oh yeah, so everything is evolving from different species changing into the next. So if that were the case, then you wouldn't see the lower species. Like, the idea is that humans came from monkeys, but we see monkeys in the planet, and at the same time we see human beings in the planet. So this doesn't hold up either, because the idea is that the monkey changed into a human being, but we don't see any apes giving birth to humans, and we still see both of them there. Even though if they're evolving, then the lower grade thing should be done with, and the newer grade thing should come. But the actual fact of the matter that is given in the Vedic literature is that the bodies are there just like apartments. And so the soul is, once it has the proper qualification to get a certain apartment or a certain body, then it's being placed by material nature into that body. So it's not that the body is changing. It's not that the apartment's changing to a new apartment, but it's just that the person who's in there gets to move to a different one as they progress in life. So, are there any other angles of Darwin's theory to kick it out at that people know of, or any other points that are made in Darwin's theory? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the point of natural selection. So the survival of the fittest. One living entity has some good traits for surviving, so those get passed on to the next one, and then the weaker one is done with. But still, we see there's all grades of living entities. There's the weak ones, there's the stronger ones. So in this way, it also doesn't work. There's human beings, there's still monkeys.
There's this chart that I saw, and I thought it was really, interesting, because it shows it shows like the different, living entities from which, the more evolved living entities came from, and it showed like the whole like fossil record. Basically, it showed like all the different like lineages, of different animals, and it was color coded, and one of the colors, it was like red, and one of the colors was blue, and so it showed all these lineages, and the red indicated, like animals that we had like fossil records of, and like actual like records that they existed, and then the blue was like the stuff that we had, and the whole chart, practically speaking, was red. It's like the whole thing, it was just like they had like little bits and pieces, and they just kind of like speculated the rest, and then they say it's practically a fact. I'd like to find it, but I don't know, I probably won't. But anyway, yeah. And then another point that I heard Sadaputa Prabhu make once is that you can't actually, and like evolutionists also acknowledge this, is that like you can't actually see it happening. Like the whole thing is that you like, it happens so gradually that you can't see it happening. That's what they would say to like, oh, you never see like an ape giving birth to a human. They say, well, it's gradual, you can't see it happening. It's like, okay, well, if you can't see it happening, and the evidence for it, like, the evidence that you have to like piece together the whole theory is pretty, scant, then the whole thing just rests on faith, basically. And so it's not like a logical theory. It's just kind of like, this is my faith. So I thought that was kind of, I heard Sadaputa, I listened to a bunch of lectures from Sadaputa Prabhu about this, and those are some things he mentioned.
I've heard this one argument that, well, then what about dinosaurs or these type of animals? We see they've gone extinct, so clearly some life has evolved, but there's even not much proof to hold these things up, such as there's not many fossils and things that have been found. And then who is the person who's looking all over the entire planet to find that, okay, there's no more of this exact species, and this animal doesn't exist anywhere on the whole planet? So if some scientist is claiming that they've seen the whole planet and that one animal doesn't exist anywhere on the surface of the earth, that's a pretty high claim that somehow now they're able to see the entire planet. But the main thing is that with that theory, we don't see any apes giving birth to human beings. But also, if his theory was true, that if Darwin's father or one of his ancestors was an ape, then that means that in time, more advanced beings would eventually come who can give better theories than him if things are evolving. So that's what we're doing now, and we're showing that it's actually not that the body evolves into something else and that the chemicals are evolving, but it's a spiritual evolution. So the soul is moving from body to body based on its karma and what type of body it's desiring and deserving. And some more points about who we will take as an authority is that Srila Prabhupada often explained how education is meant for like building character. So we can see what's the actual character of these scientists that people are taking as the biggest authorities and leaders in the world. The Srimad Bhagavatam explains that one who wants to be a leader or a parent or anything where you have some sort of dependent, that person needs to be able to deliver their dependents from the cycle of birth and death. So if we trust that some authority or scientist or someone can deliver us from the cycle of birth and death, then by all means, we should take them as an authority. But for the most part, it doesn't seem that any of them can do that. I was thinking of a few of the big scientists today, like Elon Musk is one that people often reference, a really great big thinker. But then if we look at his character and his activities, what is he doing? He goes on some talk show and he's just casually taking intoxication with the talk show host, smoking marijuana. There was some poll where people were asked what kind of president would they want in the world. And the main answer was that they'd want the type of guy that they can have a beer with. So if these are the leaders and authorities people are accepting, is that they're taking intoxication, saying all sorts of outlandish things, meat eating, all these horrible activities, then people will never actually be happy. How could we accept these kinds of leaders? Because they actually won't be able to make any proper decisions because they're so much conditioned. Like Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the words he uses for someone whose intelligence is stolen away by Maya, it's Maya aprakrita jnana. So someone might have great intelligence, but because they don't surrender unto Krishna or try to use everything is Krishna's energy. So this intelligence is even coming from Krishna. But since they don't try to use it for Krishna's service, their intelligence is stolen away by Maya. And then their whole life is used writing textbooks about like the digestive system of a blade of grass or something like this. It's stolen by the external energy of the Lord, just studying these little external things. So then it's wasted. So that's what we see going on often. Also, Chanakya Pandit, he says that some qualities of an educated person, or what is a learned person. And so one of them is to see a learned person, he sees someone else's belongings just like trash. So they don't mess with it or try to take something somebody else has. There's a few other ones that he says, like, yeah, that's the main one that I thought was helpful in this point, is he says, a learned person sees all women except their wife as their mother. So are any of these scientists doing that? Probably not, because they're addicted to so many things and so much sense gratification. So that's the main thing. If someone is actually educated, or saying this is an educated man, they need to actually be seeing all women as the mother. But no one's taught to do that in today's society. So I would doubt that these scientists actually have these qualities. And if someone can't control their senses, then there's no chance of them actually like teaching any knowledge that's going to help anyone. Because that knowledge is knowing who we are as the soul and how we can get out of this predicament of birth, death, old age, and disease. And sorry, I had just taken a few notes, so I've just been looking over them. But another thing with science is that the theories are always changing. So it's nothing concrete, because the whole way of getting to these theories is just using imperfect senses. So it's like it's an ascending process of knowledge. So with my own limited strength, I'm going to figure out this and that and then write it down as a theory. But the Vedic process of knowledge is it's descending. So we're getting knowledge from perfect sources of knowledge. For instance, we could trust someone who's saying that the universe is this many light years wide, and somehow we got to a place millions of miles away within a few days, and this and that. Or we can trust Brahma, who's the person who created the whole universe. So many scientists are saying the whole universe came from an explosion. But someone who's more intelligent would say, well, if there was an explosion, there must be some explosive device and some person who detonates the device. So what was the cause of that explosion? They would investigate further. But science today just stops there. Just everything started from some explosion and that's it. But we see Lord Brahma, he says, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarvakarna Karnam. That everything is actually coming from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's the supreme cause of all causes. So we can trust Brahma, who made the whole universe, or someone with very tiny knowledge. So those are a few points. Are there any comments or questions on this topic of the scientists and the moon? Yes, Mukunda?
Well, this was something I read a year ago, which I just thought, I mean, there are a lot of things like this, but I just came across it a year ago, or I guess it was 2021. But I thought it was a little fun. And this was a National Geographic, but it was referring to a study or an article published in Science, or the magazine or whatever, in one recent volume of Science, and capital S. And so the title was "Billions of T-Rex Likely Roamed the Earth," paleontologist report. And so I thought, okay, let's see what the information was behind it, how they arrived at that particular number, and they give more specific numbers. That in all likelihood, a T-Rex would be within 15 miles of you. 67 million years ago, a T-Rex would be within 15 miles of you. And then they give other conclusions that on average, 20,000 T-Rex lived at any one time during the time span in which T-Rexes lived, and then that a total of 2.5 billion T-Rex lived in all of North America. So they give it, because their conclusion is 2.5 billion T-Rex existed, in history. And so then, but then even in the article, you say, okay, so how did they arrive at that number, 2.5 billion? And so there's a lot of variables. One variable is, what's the time span in which T-Rexes existed? And so they said, well, it's either 2 million or 3 million. That's a significant difference. That's a significant difference. 2 million and 3 million is a pretty big, margin of error. Yeah. Years. So the time span was between, I just want to make sure I'm getting that right. Yeah, over 2 or 3 million time span. So that's one factor in the equation, arriving at 2.5 billion T-Rexes existed. And then there were some other ones they put in a certain computer simulation, and of course there's so many different values they have to include. And of course, all those values, they don't really know, they aren't really sure about. So they have to put in different ones and see what are the different possibilities. And so then the study found that the T-Rex count, given all the different variables that we aren't sure about, is between 140 million and 42 billion, which is also pretty different. So really what they're all they could conclude is that, well, if our information is correct, if all what we know is correct, then it's at least between 140 million and 42 billion. I'm not sure what the factor is of that. That's like 300 times. It's like between 1 and 300, or 1 to 300, something like that. And therefore, at any given time, there were either 1,300 or 328,000 T-Rexes at any time. But again, these are big differences. Anyway, and they just have some further conclusions in there. But just some of the articles posted, from this study are like a definitive thing that we now know 2.5 billion T-Rexes ever existed, things like that. And then you look into, well, why is that? Well, because between 140 million and 42 billion could have existed. Therefore, the average hovers around 2.5 billion, and therefore that's the conclusion. But I was thinking it reminds me of something like when you're in mathematics, when you have to multiply or even add two different decimals, but one of them's what you had to round one. What's the term for that? And then, but the conclusion, the answer, you have to then you can't leave the answer kind of more precise or more exact than the variables you used in it. So if one variable you had to round to the 10th place, and another one was like really precise to the 10,000th place, well, you can't then include the 10,000th place in your answer because that variable is specific, but the other one was completely non-specific. But in cases like these, in a lot of cases, if like in Dhruta Karma Prabhu's research in his book and in his talks, you see all these examples where someone takes something which is it takes a multitude of really strong speculations or very, very weak speculations, and then from preaches some very conclusive or some conclusion, very specific conclusion. So this seemed to me like that. So I just thought it was fun, but that's all.
Yes, Prabhu?
Question and comment, Dr. Joseph. It's nice you talk about the full moon having trees. I watched the moon set this morning, which is, really beautiful to watch it set on the ocean. and he talked about the Lord of the Forest, or the King of the Forest. I just came from the Rockies. Soma, yeah, I just came from the Rockies, so I think I've met the moon god. Anyway, I'm just kind of being silly, but as far as the T-Rexes, they were wiped out during the Great Flood, and there were giants on the earth. I'm watching the History Channel. They're finding skulls as big as my body, human skulls. So there's the Bhaktivedanta Gita talk about that period, because I haven't heard anything about. I know the dinosaur bones are there. You see them, and there's these skulls, and these, there were giants, and the flood came, and here we are now. Is there any ideas in the Bhaktivedanta Gita talking about the flood, or?
Well, yeah, there is Matsya, actually. If you want to hear about a great devastating flood, and the Srimad Bhagavatam explains that the universe goes in cycles, and so there's big devastations and smaller devastations, and those involve flooding. But the Supreme Personality of Godhead actually comes in many different forms, so he even comes to save people at that certain. There's a wonderful pastime in the Srimad Bhagavatam where he comes as Matsya, large fish avatar, saving many people at this time of the devastation, which is like a large flood. But on this point with the fossils, I was actually hearing a talk with Srila Prabhupada where some of his disciples were explaining that one of the main points in Darwin's theory is that human beings didn't come until recently, because everything is evolving and human beings are now the peak of that evolution. They're the best, so they can enjoy their senses the most. That's kind of the whole idea with it. But these disciples were explaining that just recently there were some scientific findings published which were showing fossils of human beings from way before what his theory says, millions of years ago. So it just debunked the whole theory right there. So this is the main problem with the way of getting knowledge in today's time period in Kali Yuga, is that it's just a lot of speculation, guessing, and utilizing imperfect senses to gather that information. But that doesn't actually bring us to any real truth, because real truth is found when you go to an authority who actually knows, who just passes the knowledge down. There's this nice verse that I was thinking describes this nicely. Ata Shri Krishna namadi nabhaved grayam indriyai sevan mukhe hijivado swayam eva sparatyada. Therefore, material senses cannot appreciate Krishna's holy name, form, qualities, and pastimes. When a conditioned soul is awakened to Krishna consciousness and renders service by using his tongue to chant the Lord's holy name and taste the remnants of the Lord's food, the tongue is purified, and one gradually comes to understand who Krishna really is. So the material senses aren't going to cut it for finding the absolute truth. But by engaging in a spiritual process, one can actually see these things that are beyond the material senses. One can come to know Krishna, who is the most subtle that there is. You're not going to find him with a microscope. But the supreme absolute truth, Krishna, can be known by engaging in his service and by hearing about him from bona fide authorities. And so that's what we're getting in all of the Vedic texts, specifically the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita. So it's really just a matter of which authority that we want to trust. Shukadeva Goswami was such a qualified speaker. He was only 16 years old, but when he came to the sages of Naimisharanya, and it was all the greatest thinkers, greatest scientists, munis, sages, all the greatest personalities in the universe, when Shukadeva Goswami came to them, he was only 16 years old. Still, they were saying, okay, this is the person that we're going to have speak to the king, whose words are going to be spoken of for thousands and thousands of years, because they saw that this person is extremely qualified. So all the most qualified people in the universe are saying Shukadeva Goswami is the most qualified. So I don't really think I'm more advanced than them that I can say, no, actually, Dr. So-and-so is going to be better than Shukadeva Goswami. It doesn't make sense. And then Shukadeva Goswami is passing on the same knowledge that so many great thinkers, such as Brahma, are passing on. How long do we have for
I can take a question.
Okay.
I have a question, but you've inspired so many thoughts in me. I wanted to kind of follow my train of thinking really quick and then get to a question. Thank you for your research. This is a very interactive talk too. So we feel like we're part of a conversation. That was a nice way of doing Bhagavatam class. Thank you for your preparation.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
A lot of what you said resonated with me. Joseph, when I was reading Genesis, the Old Testament, there was a sentence that really struck me at the time that said, but that was back when the giants roamed the earth. I never got that. So I think you just helped me understand what they meant in Genesis, I guess. And I almost put the book down. I was like, what do you mean giants? Yeah. But Genesis, I guess, got it right. And that, so, and it's pivoting off what Mukunda was saying too, in terms of a very weak speculation. And then you make these strong philosophical statements based on that. But I took astronomy in college too. So you actually inspired me. I remember in the very first day, he said, well, first of all, that the universe is 14 billion years old. Talk about having to unlearn what you've learned. I mean, like I held on to that for so long, that the universe is 14 billion years old. So I remember studying Bhagavatam, and it's such a different way of looking at time. I had to really get over that idea of like, I know the universe is 14 billion years old, you know? And so that was very difficult for me. I'm still giving that up, actually. So the very first day was in astronomy. Our teacher said, this is an observational science. We can only observe space and then make decisions, right? And then I was taking a class where we were studying evolution, and Dr. Richard Leakey is like the primary person who's proponent of evolution now. And what he's saying is, if you take the missing link Lucy, which is Australopithecus, then you have Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Homo sapien, and you look at the skeletons, he goes, you can just see evolution occurring, right? You can see it. I'm looking at it and I can see it. So you've done a good job of saying they have imperfect senses. So what they can see, what they can observe, is not going to give them the actual answer, right? They haven't actually shown evolution occurring. They've witnessed these things, and they're on weak speculative evidence. They're making these very strong theories. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah, you know, unless you're beyond those defects, you have no idea of what's going on or what reality is. So if we're just looking at things and trying to make conclusions, it's not very good. And that's how Darwin's theory began, is he was looking at finches and how their beaks developed over time to adapt to the flowers that were there, to be able to collect nectar more efficiently. That was it. He observed finch beaks, and then this whole thing came from there, right? So, you know, right before the universal form is shown to Arjuna, right? He's given spiritual vision to be able to see that. Is that correct?
Fine eyes.
Yeah. So that's the only guy that has real vision right there. What he observes is correct because he's given divine eyes, right? Otherwise, we're just playing around in a 14 billion year old universe, right? So my question is, that's the first time I've learned of the moon god, Soma. So is he the one that brings the Soma Ras to the party in the heavenly planets?
That's the question you write.
I thought I'd soften it. So do we, is that the same Soma? Is that where his name comes from? Did they brew that on the moon?
Well, it says he rules over the moon, and that's where the people are drinking Soma Ras. So there's some connection there.
There must be some plant there where they can make Soma. There you go, we've proven it.
Yeah.
They're not making it out of rocks.
Yeah. Yeah, in Prabhupada was saying, because he's doing, scientists today, they're just speculating with their senses. Maybe this happened. I saw a finch beak, so maybe everything is coming from chemicals. But Prabhupada is using the Vedic knowledge to make an intelligent, you could say, speculation. Like he's using real intelligence, which is it's being passed down from those who have seen everything. Brahma, Krishna, who's made everything. It's just being passed down. So he's seeing in the Vedas, it explains that the moon is what's supplying the juice of life to all the plants and the vegetation. So with that knowledge that we already know is a fact because it's in the Vedas, then how is it that someone can say this picture of a dusty place is the moon? So he's using, this is a good example of real intelligence. He's saying, what's it say in the Vedas? And then stacking that up to what someone is claiming, and then using that to show, okay, it doesn't actually add up. There's just one more point I wanted to make because Maharaj mentioned it last night, and it was really nice how with the amount of time that's been in the universe, this idea that everything is coming from chemicals just by chance, random interactions of some different proteins and things running into each other, and then that makes like a amoeba, and that grows into a fish, and then a person. This idea that everything is coming from random chance, just scientists and statistical people who do statistics have shown that there hasn't actually been enough time in the universe for things to happen just from chance. I saw a nice devotee give a talk on this recently. He was showing these videos where different scientists were showing that to make the most basic protein, and a protein is like a building block in a living organism. So to make the most basic protein that's needed to start making the body of some creature, everything has to be set up so perfectly, just like with intelligence. So they were talking about DNA, and they were showing how DNA is like a code that has to be written out perfect in order for everything to start working. And when you have a code on like an app on your phone or computer, if there's anything random in it, like 1 0 or 1 changes in that code, the whole thing stops working. It has to be ordered. It has to be set up with an intelligence for it to work. So this idea that everything's coming randomly, it doesn't make sense. The second that something's random in a machine, it stops working. But they were showing that to make this most little basic protein, it takes very, very like a precise lining up of different things. And so they went through these whole experiments, running it through computers, to show that the amount of times it takes for a little protein to be made by chance, if all the chemicals are available to make it, it's like 1 in like a trillion is a huge number. And then to make 2 of them, it's like even bigger. And so anyway, they showed that the amount of time it takes to randomly get the most basic building block for an organism, there's not that much time in the whole universe, according to how long scientists say the universe has been around. So that was a nice way that the material scientists defeated it. And then just to wrap it up, I just wanted to read this one letter from Prabhupada that wraps up the whole thing, if that's okay. I don't know how much time we had.
We have time, but if you want to end now, we can end now.
Oh, I didn't know how much time there was. Okay.
We got some comments and questions too.
So I'll just read this and then the questions. Okay, so Prabhupada gives a nice, just whole overview in this letter of the whole moon thing. He says, I do not know how these doubts have come upon you. Why bother about all these things? They're not very important. Everything is explained in Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. Why you are still asking? If you believe whatever the material so-called scientists are saying, that is your business. But I do not believe any of their so-called observations in outer space by the blunt material senses can be true without any doubt. So why you doubt Vedas and not scientists? I cannot even see into the next room. How I can see anything very surely, so millions of miles distant. But if someone who has been there tells me, then I can know everything about that place. So we must have to take the authority of experienced persons to get the truth. And what experience our so-called scientists have got? Can they deliver even an ant from the miserable conditions of this spot life, from birth, death, disease, and old age? No. They have spent simply millions of dollars to make a show of their so-called learning, and the result is a handful of dust, that's all. So we are not very much impressed by them, neither we take their vision as perfect. They will say that millions of years ago the human beings were primitive hunters, but if we see Vedic language, we can understand that their thought and language and intelligence was not that of primitive men, no. If you are looking for some excuse to doubt, then Maya will always provide you. So this or that you may find out something flaw if you want. But Krishna says, surrender unto me, and I will give you all protection, perfect knowledge of everything. You should not go to modern scientists for perfect knowledge. They cannot supply that. Krishna will supply you. Of course, sometimes there is allegorical reference in the Vedas, just like the body is called the city of 9 gates, like that. So we may sometimes misunderstand due to our imperfect reading, but it is true, even if it is true that they have landed on the moon, so what is their accomplishment? If I come to Earth planet and land in the Sahara Desert, then I say, oh, this planet is a barren desert, no one lives here. The moon may be like that or like this. So what does that help to our Krishna consciousness movement? We have nothing to do with moon planet or this planet and that planet in Krishna consciousness. We simply want to serve Krishna, that's all. Do not be disturbed by these things. Simply go on with your work in positive mood. That will be best for you and for others also. After all, intelligence to understand Krishna is not within the range of your material senses. You cannot make any experiments and calculations and expect to find Krishna. If somehow or other you are fortunate enough to find out a pure devotee of the Lord, then you get opportunity to, there's a little blank here, but I think the word is serve him, to blank, I'm thinking it's serve. You get the opportunity to serve him, and as you surrender, Krishna gives you the intelligence by which you may come to him. That is sure. No other process will give us any intelligence to understand things as they are, except Krishna consciousness. Should I?
Thank you very much, Prabhu. I have a quick comment, if I may.
Okay.
My name is Maitreya Das. Thank you for your notes. Don't be sorry about the notes. We like the notes. Thank you so much for preparing.
Thank you.
You gave a nice examples about imperfect senses and misunderstanding the adaptations of certain creatures. There is such a thing as adaptation based on pressures from the environment, and we can see how the morphology of creatures can be changed. We've seen it in dog species and in various grains that are grown. And for materialists, this is very confusing. You know, they draw this all the way back then, therefore they make conclusions about chemical evolution and life itself, which is the erroneous part. So it can be confusing. And it really comes down, you mentioned the statistics, which show that statistically it's not possible for even for complicated molecules to have arisen in the time the universe has existed. But the thing is, these arguments bolster the faith of the faithful. But just like you mentioned, Krishna gives knowledge, as he says in the Bhagavad Gita, he also gives faith. If one wants to devote himself to a particular demigod, Krishna says, I make his faith steady. So for the materialists that want to identify with their bodies, he gives them the faith. They'll say, well, you know, you may say all these things about the statistics, but the fact that we're all here means that it happened this time. You know, it's like they say that the lottery is a tax on people who are bad at math. So, you know, they want that faith, Krishna gives it to them, and there's no way through arguments you'll ever convince them otherwise until they finally, you know, eat some prasadam or perform some service and get a little bit of purification of the heart. So thank you very much for your presentation. Very much appreciated. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
But I can wait if a temple room devotee wants to go first.
That's okay.
Okay, so Prabhu, may I ask your name?
My name is Rishi Kumara Das.
Oh, Rishi Prabhu, thank you very much. Because you spoke so much about Darwin during your class, I was forced, if I may say it, to go to Wikipedia to know about the religious Darwin. And what I got is, and this is Darwin's himself speaking about himself related to how religious he was. And he says, the quote is, quote, I think that generally an agnostic would be the most correct description of my state of mind, end quote. And I went to see the definition of agnostic related to the online dictionary, and the definition of agnostic is a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of the existence or nature of God. So that is my contribution, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
He believes nothing can be known, but he's giving these theories. That's really nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Believes nothing can be known about the absolute truth, and why is he speculating these so-called truths?
Yes,
Okay.
the whole time.
What a rascal. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.